Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's criminal charges are one step closer to being dropped. Federal Appeals Court ordered a response by the case's judge, who delayed the DOJ's request to drop the proceedings.
All of this comes after a new document released reveals the Obama administration's own role in the FBI's investigation of Flynn. So friend of the show and the co-founding editor of The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald, he recently wrote about the revelations and how they relate to the broader Russiagate investigation. He joins us now via Skype to elaborate. Glenn, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you guys.
Absolutely. So, Glenn, maybe just describe some of the recent developments in the Flynn case. You've been doing an excellent job on System Update. I want to make sure everybody knows about that as well. Please make sure that you're subscribed and watching that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I just want to make clear when it comes to the Flynn case, a kind of overarching point that's always true whenever you're discussing civil liberties, which is a lot of people can't get past their ideological or political view of Michael Flynn in order to form ideas about what the government did in this case. Either they like Michael Flynn ideologically and therefore think the government acted wrongfully, or they hate Michael Flynn's politics and therefore want to defend what the government did. And that's always the wrong way to think about these questions, just like it didn't matter what you thought about Guantanamo detainees and whether they were great guys or bad guys, in order to know that the government's detention of people without due process was a miscarriage of justice and an abuse of power. So it's really important to separate who he is politically and ideologically, or his character or whatever, from the question of whether the government abused its power. And on that question, it has become indisputably clear that the corruption on the part of the Justice Department and the FBI and other components of the security state who investigated so-called Russiagate is infinitely more corrupt than the people that they were investigating. And when it comes to General Flynn himself, the overarching point is that there was never any valid reason to be investigating General Flynn in the first place, to send FBI agents to question him, to ask him about calls he had with the Russian ambassador. And I think that one of the things that's missing from this discussion is that when you say, oh, the FBI had no valid predicate to be investigating General Flynn, it sounds like it's just kind of this annoying technicality designed to justify Flynn lying to the FBI. It's actually fundamental to our entire system of government, to having a republic, that you constrain the government and its ability to investigate its citizens by forcing them only to investigate citizens if they have a valid grounds for believing that there might have been a crime committed by that citizen. Otherwise, you have like a free-floating secret police who can just investigate anybody that they want. And in this case, there was never a reason to believe that he was an agent of the Russian government, that he conspired with the Russian government. All of that was, even by the FBI's own reasoning, proved to be invalid, and yet they continued to investigate him anyway, and that's how they extracted what they concluded 10 months afterward was a lie.
The piece that President Trump in particular is seizing on is this idea of how involved President Obama specifically, and also Joe Biden and Susan Rice were, how much knowledge they have, how much this was sort of directed from the top. What do we know on that front?
We know almost nothing about that. We do know now, because of newly released documents, that President Obama was aware, at least as of January 4th, which is when there was an Oval Office meeting, and then January 5th as well, when he was the one who told Acting Attorney General Sally Yates about the call between Flynn and Kislyak and the fact that it had been monitored. And obviously people went to President Obama and told him about that. I don't find anything untoward about that. President Obama was still the president, even though he was, at that point, 2 weeks away from leaving. He was a lame duck president, but he was still the president. I think it's valid for the president to know if there are people, whether it's illegal or not, working behind the scenes to undermine the foreign policy of the United States. So the fact that President Obama knew about that doesn't concern or bother me. I don't think that's proof of any wrongdoing. I do think there are questions, though, about the extent to which Obama knew about what the FBI was doing in targeting somebody, General Flynn, who President Obama hated for years. And General Flynn felt the same way about Obama. Whether or not the FBI and the Justice Department under President Obama was used during the campaign to target somebody for political vindictive reasons as opposed to legitimate law enforcement reasons, we just don't know the answer to those questions.
Right. And Glenn, what's your view on the underlying call itself? Because that was really where I think there's a lot of consternation about that. Flynn, to a lot of people, had the temerity to say at the behest of President Trump about wanting to pursue better diplomatic relations with Russia, saying, hey, please don't, we have a new government coming in on this. Now, Comey, according to those new documents that we had from a Susan Rice email, had said that was unusual activity of discussions between the incoming national security advisor and the Russian ambassador. What's your view on that, Glenn?
How could it possibly be untoward or even unusual, let alone illegal, for the incoming national security advisor during the transition, a few weeks out of taking over, to call their counterparts in foreign governments with the specific goal of tamping down tensions by saying, look, we know that these expulsions that President Obama just ordered, removing 35 Russian diplomats from the United States, as well as some minor sanctions that he imposed, are the kind of things that ordinarily you would feel compelled to respond to and retaliate against, which could spark a cycle of retaliation. But just stay calm. We're going to be in the White House in 3 weeks, and we can do what President Trump campaigned on, which is building better relations with Russia. But if you overreact now, it's going to make that very difficult. That's a completely appropriate thing to do. And every major media outlet, over the years, including the ones most vehemently opposed to President Trump, like the Washington Post and CNN, have all said that it's completely standard for national security transition officials to make those kind of calls to their counterparts. That's why there's a transition.
Right.
So even that, those calls, I'm glad that Flynn was doing that. If he hadn't been reaching out to his counterparts in the Russian government and other important governments around the world that have nuclear weapons, that would be malfeasance. So to try and, take that and turn it into something illegal, which is what Jim Comey and the FBI did, as these new notes reveal, right? They were saying, like, what's our goal here? Is it to trick him into lying in order to get him fired or to prosecute him? They knew what he said to Kislyak. They knew there was nothing wrong with that. That interrogation never should have happened. There should never been an investigation of him in the first place. But even if there were a valid investigation, there was nothing wrong with those calls. And so they should not have been interrogating him about them at all.
Right.
Glenn, also help us sort through these questions about, unmasking and who asked for him to be unmasked and that whole piece.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion about that because most people who are commenting on it have no idea what they're talking about. So just to remind everybody of what unmasking is, there was a huge scandal in 2005, which is, I know, 8 lifetimes ago with how we measure politics now, where the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize, James Risen and Eric Lichtblau, for revealing that the Bush and Cheney administration were spying on the conversations of American citizens, by which that meant when American citizens were talking to foreign nationals who were being targeted, and they discovered that the foreign national they were targeting for surveillance ended up talking to an American. Under the law, they were supposed to hang up. They're not supposed to listen to calls of American citizens, even if they're not the target, without a warrant. That's what the Constitution says. You're supposed to go to the FISA court and get a warrant. And they ignored that. They said, no, if we catch an American talking to one of our foreign targets, we're not going to hang up. We're going to keep listening. And that was illegal. And so Congress changed the law and said in 2007 and 2008, from now on, that's legal. We want the government to be able to continue to listen to foreign targets calls, even if they're talking to American citizens. But to protect American citizens' privacy, you have to obscure the identity of that person in government reports. So you say, we were listening to this al-Qaeda suspect and he talked to U.S. person 1. So that's what masking is. You obscure the person's identity who talked to the foreign national that you targeted to protect their identity. Senior national security officials have the ability to request an unmasking to find out what the identity of that person is, if there's a valid reason to do so. They can't just do it for fun or because they're curious. They need a valid reason. The authority is really broad, so they do it all the time. So it doesn't, just because they unmasked here doesn't mean it was wrong. But the question is, why did they do it? As it turns out, it probably was the case that General Flynn's identity was unmasked from the very beginning at the behest of the FBI because the intelligence report would have made no sense without it, which still leads to the question, why was that done? So I don't think this unmasking controversy, this brouhaha yet, is particularly compelling given how much information is missing.
Well, certainly. Thanks for breaking it down, Glenn, as somebody who actually knows what they're talking about on this front.
Extremely helpful. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah.
All right. Good to talk to you guys.
Great to see you. Next on Rising, Jacobin editor-at-large David Sirota. He explains the calculations between Elizabeth Warren's latest Medicare for All pivot. That's when Rising continues.